Greetings, my friends. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Let's Get Gritty podcast with Dr. India White. I'm so thrilled to be here with all of you rock stars this evening. I hope you are having a wonderful December, a wonderful holiday season. So many different variables moving right now. I know regarding schools or wrapping up the school, first part of the school year, people are planning things with family and friends, and so we've got things going on everywhere, and it's a super exciting time. I want to get to a really fun show, I think, today, where we're going to continue our discussion of grit like we always do. But before I get started, I want to first, of course, I've already welcomed you. I want to remind you that the Let's Get Gritty podcast will be featured on Swain Girl Media Channel, hosted by Precious Swain on Fire Stick. Thank you, Precious, for that. I also wanted to remind you guys that if you've not had a chance to follow me on social media, these are my social media channels below. You have Facebook at Miss India White. LinkedIn is The India White. Twitter, Indie Speak and Teach. Instagram, Indie238. YouTube is India White 123. You can also, when you get a chance, check out my website at www.india-white.com, where you'll see opportunities to check out my blog, where I talk about various things, whether that's education or, other things to inspire you, or if you're even starting a business, I have some things on there for you there. And also you can check out my books. I do have some discounts running right now that will change once we are out of the holiday season. So make sure you're taking advantage of those discounts. And then, of course, if you're wanting to schedule me for a speaking event, coaching event, professional development, webinar, whatever you're wanting, I am here for you. Now, I want to dive right into our show. I'm super excited. And the reason why I want to talk about grit today with y'all is because this is something that people or educators now are really starting to grasp the concept as something different than what we've always heard grit to be. We've always thought of grit being something, relevant to working out or something that has nothing to do in the realm of education. So I am here to spin a light of information and to make you think and to inform you on what grit is and how we can continue to develop and recognize grit in all of our students. So today we'll be talking about recognizing grit, developing grit in all of our students. I always start by talking about what the definition of grit is. I know you've heard this a million times, but I'm the type of person I have to, give honor and credit to where honor and credit is due. So the definition of grit comes from Dr. Angela Duckworth. She said that it is the passion, perseverance to obtain long-term goals. And she talked about how you're going to stick out your resiliency for a period of time, or where you're expanding that time and you're continuing to reach goals, and you're goal setting and you're achieving those goals. If you are making sure that you're having a long-term goal for your passion and your perseverance. Now, when we are trying to talk about how grit, not only is it for everyone, but we want to talk about how do you recognize grit in your students? What does that look like, and how do you develop grit? So sometimes you'll have students that come to your classroom, and the first thing they do is they sit down, they put their head down. It's easy to assume, oh, this child doesn't have grit. I mean, look, their head's down, they're not engaged. Maybe the student is not really answering questions like the other students, or maybe the student is showing up late to class. Maybe the student, only finished half of their homework assignment. And so a lot of these different predictors can make us assume at times that these students aren't really as gritty as we would like for them to be. In order to recognize grit in these students who we assume have low grit levels, the first thing we want to do is we want to definitely make sure we are following these specific tips that I'm going to share with you. First off, having a sense of empathy. Let's go back to the student that I gave an example of that would have their head down. Student came to your class, They sit down, they put their head down, and they're checked out. What is their grit level? Do they really have grit? I want you to now empathize. What did that student go through before they got to your classroom? Was there an incident at home? What did they have to do last night? Did they have to take care of family? Did they have to work? Um, were they up studying late for another class? Um, are they an athlete? And maybe they had practice and it was so rigorous, and maybe they worked out, maybe they had conditioning. And so maybe these students, maybe they do have grit, but they're just exhausted from these other elements of life. So it assumes it's good to, or it's easy to assume that they don't have grit because they're exhausted. So I want you to empathize whenever you're dealing with a student with their head down, or the student that did half of the homework assignment. Let's ask some questions about that student. They did half of your homework. So do they have math anxiety? Do these students have a negative history in math in general? Did they not pass a certain standardized test? Are they repeating that class and maybe they feel like they failed so much? So maybe they're starting to take on this imposter syndrome of, I just can't do it and I just think I'm a failure kind of a thing. Or, do they not have moral support? Is there not support at home? Is there not support among their friends? Or maybe they're being peer pressured to not perform as well. So they're leaving some questions blank so that they can fit in with their social environment. These are so many things that we want to keep in mind when we're empathizing about students and their grit levels. Another thing we want to do is find out what really motivates them. So maybe, just maybe, they're not as motivated about that particular math question or that math project because it has no relevance in their personal life. Like maybe you're talking about, I've had teachers I've had conversations with, and they talked about phone plans and how certain phone plans talked about how you're paying money for minutes. How like back in the day when we used to have like the flip phone or the little cheap Nokia phone. I don't know if you guys remember that. Or like the little iPods, right? Like if you really go back in time. And in those days, if you had a question about, okay, you have to pay for minutes, because you paid for your minutes and then you could talk on the phone at 9 o'clock, right? If we went back to those days, sure, let's talk about minutes. But if you're talking about today's children, who probably all have unlimited plans, who are YouTubers doing all kinds of things on Snapchat, they're so advanced. So if we had a problem that talked about, oh, you're going to have to pay for your minutes and finding the system of equations, whatever it is, that is not of relevance today. So I could see how a student could check out on a problem like that and be like, this doesn't make any sense, or if you're talking about snow and the student lives down south, Florida or Cali or somewhere, and they're like, what do you mean? Like there's no snow here. So I don't know what you're talking about when you're saying shoveling snow. I've never had that experience. Or you're talking about, listen, maybe you're in certain communities and you're talking about an airplane and looking at the process of getting checked in for a flight. What if the student has never been on a flight before? And we're asking these problems. So it's very important that we do our part to make sure that we're asking questions that will motivate them and questions that are very relevant to their everyday life to stimulate an interest in math in our classrooms. Okay, another thing that we can do is we can be intentional on building curiosity of our students, because sometimes students are curious about other things. Maybe something else has their attention and maybe they're distracted. Maybe you have someone in the classroom that has a bright personality, or they're the class clown and they're popular. Maybe they're super popular on YouTube, and so you're competing against these different elements in the math classroom. So what can you do to be intentional on building curiosity? Maybe you can have a plethora of options for students to be involved in the class with various activities. Do you have digital resources that you're using, whether that's Kahoot or Blink or whatever? Do you have opportunities for them to work with their peers? Do you have opportunities for them to create problems in the classroom, like assessment problems or quiz problems or problems for a worksheet that they're going to be working on together, that of course covers the benchmarks and covers, the particular topic that's that's at hand. So these are some things that you want to keep in mind. Also, celebrating their effort. Sometimes students already are feeling defeated in a math class. They don't like math at times. They've had horrible experiences, and unfortunately, sometimes you're dealing with that brokenness. And the last thing they need is to be reminded as to how they're just not making the cut. It is so imperative that we do our part as educators to celebrate their efforts so that we can continue to develop their curiosity, develop their grit, develop their passion so that they feel like they matter, they feel like they're really making a difference, and they're really making proficiency in those math classes. Another thing you want to do is to discuss mistakes optimistically. Students can say, "Oh, I got a 30%." Okay, you got a 30%. But listen, let's review this and let's see what you missed. Let's see what you now understand. And next time you take this, you're going to now know this, because now that we reviewed it, you've shown me that you know it now. So now you have a higher level of proficiency, and we're going to continue to build on that as you continue to think through these problems in the classroom. You continue to work through these problems, and you're aggressively going after the knowledge in this math classroom. So being very optimistic on purpose, telling them, I see your effort. I see your work ethic. I know you can do it. I know you have what it takes. I believe in you. Children need to hear that, grades K-12 and beyond. They need to hear that. They need to know that we trust in their ability to be great in our classrooms. So I want to now talk about a little bit of research on developing grit and just what does it look like? What is research saying about it? What is it really relevant to? So I pulled a really cool article off of the internet called "Developing Grit in Our Students," and it's by Jennifer Bashent. I hope I'm not butchering her name. A PhD, and it was as to why grit is a desirable trait and a practical strategy for teachers and students. Some people are like, oh, you really don't need grit. It doesn't make sense. So we're going to break that down today as to why grit is needed and why it's a trait that will make the world of a difference in any classroom once it's really understood and implemented as a trait with fidelity, and it's developed in the classroom space. So Dr. Jennifer, she talks about how grit is the quality that enables individuals to work hard and to stick to their long-term goals and their passions. She says that it would be important for students both in school and in life. And she's definitely referring to some research throughout this, but I'm just going to give her respect because this is her work. So she continues and she talks about grit, and then she switches a little bit and talks about resilience, because I talked about grit being great resilience in time. So the first two words in that acronym are great resilience. So if you're looking at grit, you're really looking at building the resilience of learners. You're building the resilience of anybody that you're working with. So resilience is related to grit here, she says, because part of what it means to be gritty is to be resilient when challenges present themselves. So again, to be resilient is the key here. So when you're gritty, you're really resilient in the face of challenges. So think about it. Grit means I'm resilient in the face of challenges. So what is resilience? So in her work, she talks about, she referenced a couple of researchers. She says Martin Seligman said that resilience is defined as the ability to appraise situations without distorting them, right? So you're owning what's going on and then thinking about changes that are possible in life. Listen, this is powerful because this right here, this means that any student, no matter their hardship, no matter their background, no matter what they are facing, if they develop a resilience to these situations effectively, they will be able to develop their grit in any circumstances, including in your classroom. So listen, the ability to appraise situations without distorting them and thinking about changes that are possible in life. The key here is making a student begin to think about changes that are possible for their lives. And I want to say changes that are positive, changes that will help them to be successful. So that is where we are here. We have students that are going through certain situations and they are so bogged down and overwhelmed. And sometimes they are facing things that are not fair and that are not just, right? But how do you help those students in those particular situations become change agents to their situation where they say, you know what? I understand I might have, had this situation happen to me, or somebody, was not, fair in how they dealt with something in my life, or I was placed in a situation where I'm going through this and every day I have to take up this load and all this. But how can I change my situation for the better in the math class, or in my living environment, or in my academia? Like, what can I do to be a change agent to make sure that I turn out to be successful? This is powerful because it helps students to understand how to be responsible in hard situations. It's never hard to deal with a student who's being abused, who has been judged harshly and judged wrongly, or homelessness, or whatever they have going on. Those situations are always sticky, they're never easy. But if we can help those students to develop a mindset where they say, you know what, change is possible for me, change is possible for my situation, even though it feels like the world is against me, or I have the world on my shoulders and this is just a tough situation. Change is possible. And if we can go into our classroom spaces reminding students that they have the power to be as successful as they want to be, the sky is the limit. If we have that type of optimistic conversations with our students, anything can happen when we help them to get the big picture as to how they can have change for the positive in their lives, and how they can go on to be great while we're helping to develop their grit levels in our classrooms. So this is very interesting with this work here. So then Dr. Jennifer goes on. She says, so why should we pay so much attention to grit? So why is grit such a big deal, or is it? I mean, some people are like, oh, you don't need it at all. Other people are like, it's like everything. I'm probably one of those people. But it's so we have different people at different ends of the spectrum. So why should we pay attention to grit? Well, she goes on to talk a little bit more about it. And so she says that Duckworth and Seligman, they have demonstrated that grit, perseverance, and self-discipline are better predictors of success in college for students than anything else. So these factors, grit, perseverance, and self-discipline, are better predictors of success in college. So if you can develop grit, perseverance, and self-discipline within your classroom space for students, you are inevitably affecting their ability to be successful in college, and I think in the career force as well. So now let's keep going. She continues and she says that Perkins Go here in 2013, she quotes them. She says, the people who are ambitious and have no limit to how much they want to understand, they're going to learn or succeed, and they are also both gritty and talented. Now, before this, she talked about how talking about a student and just praising them for being smart, like they're a gifted student. Oh, you're so smart, you're gifted. How that actually worked against a student's grit, because they kind of felt like, oh, well, I already have it, so I'm good. I don't really have to push, or I don't really do anything. So she talked about this, about how we should focus on building grit and focusing on those that are ambitious, having ambitious traits. So when you're dealing with students that are not motivated, what's going on with their ambition? Why are they not ambitious? What can you do to cultivate that ambition in your classroom so that you can build and develop the grit levels? So here again, it says the people who are ambitious and have no limit to how much they want to understand. This part, they have no limit to how much they want to understand. So what's going on? What is the disconnect in our classrooms if students are coming to our classroom space and they don't have or they do have a limit, or they don't want to understand what's going on? Why is there a disconnect? Because If we can find out what that disconnect is, then we can finish the rest of the sentence for every student. Then our students will learn and they'll succeed and they'll be both talented and gritty. So the the key element here is, what do we need to do as educators to make our students want to learn and to have no limit in how much they want to learn and understand in our math classes? Is it our instructional delivery? Is it personality? Is it culture? Is it life circumstances? We have to get down to the root of the matter, the root cause of the matter that would cause a disconnect in a student's desire to learn or a desire to try in our classrooms. And so, with that said, she continues on. She says, children who are or who have more of a growth mindset tend to be grittier. Again, children who have more of a growth mindset tend to be grittier. The attitude that I can get better if I try harder most likely results in the development of a tenacious, hardworking person. So let's think about this. What about the student that has their head down? And what if after you talk to the student, they really do have this mindset? So then that means that you have to then produce equitable practices to help get that student, adjusted to the classroom so that they can get back to their 100% self, because they have to deal with all these other, outlying factors that are affecting their ability to really focus on the classroom topic. So, or children who have more of a growth mindset tend to be grittier. So, how do we develop then this attitude from all students that says, I can get better if I try harder? I can get better if I can try harder. I can get better if I try harder. So, my question is, what if they have math anxiety? What if they are tired? What are the equitable practices that we have in place to deal with these other sidebar issues that are taking away from their ability to really show their proficiency in our classes, because they have real life situations going on? And that means that there has to be other conversations and other reinforcements and accommodations made to help really service our students, to get them back to where they need to be. So let's continue. So she talks now, and she says, Patient says, the work that Carol Dweck has done to show you that you can change your mindset would also be relevant to changing your grit. Again, so Dr. Dweck talks about a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And Patient is saying that this is relevant to changing your grit. So it's all about mindset. How do you help students to be resilient when they have maybe low motivation? They have so many other things going on. We have to change their mindset. We have to help change the mindset so that they become grittier. Well, how do you do that? Through conversation, through relationship building, figuring out the big picture, what's going on, what happened, what are they going through right now, what did they go through in the class before they got to you? Are they nervous because it's a test? Like, what is going on with the whole child? And that's why it's imperative to consider various equitable practices to get the students where they need to be. Now, let's continue. She talks also now, she says, Dean 2014, she quotes them and says that in order to build character and grit in students, it is essential to also develop a school culture that emphasizes character and grit. There is something about walking the halls of particular school cultures where you can literally predict a school grade by the way it feels, by the way it seems like the structures are in place. If you go to school, you see trash because students are affected by their environments. Now, go back to this quote. In order for us to build character and grit in students, it is essential to develop a school culture that emphasizes character and grit. And this is why I push for positive behavior systems in schools, because if the school has a school-wide umbrella, like a school-wide culture of a structure that they're all following, then it is the norm that students would behave a certain way, and that, whatever way that they're behaving, that is aligned with the positive behavior systems, which is also aligned with the school's code of conduct, right? So then that eliminates those distractions that would take away from their abilities to really stay focused and to, also maximize their time during instructional delivery. So these are some things to keep in mind. And then also here saying, emphasizing to build a school culture of grit. Are we talking about grit in all grade levels? Are we talking about grit? Are all teachers saying the same thing? Is one teacher super hardcore motivated and awesome, and then the other teachers aren't really saying the same thing? Are all the teachers on the same page? So then that means that we might have to revisit some faculty meetings and figure out, like, what are we saying in our faculty meetings? Are we celebrating student successes? Are we celebrating teacher successes? Are we celebrating the effort of teachers and of students? Like, what are we doing to build that culture of grit in our school halls and in our classrooms? So she goes on here and she says that Bayshant says that schools should devote more time, not less time, um, to intentional effort in developing grit in students. Because teaching grit means that helping students understand how to set and achieve their goals. That's going to not only trickle throughout their school experience, that's going to help them as adults, right? So again, schools should devote more time and intentional effort in developing grit in their students if you're really trying to help them to remain proficient and successful in classrooms. Now, so Dr. Jennifer was referencing many researchers here, including Duckworth, and then continuing here, she says another thing from Duckworth: when we teach students how to regulate their attention and emotions and behavior, we empower them to pursue goals that are most important to them. I think one of the disconnects for students that have low motivation, where are the goals? Where are their goals? What are their goals? What do they want to become when they grow up? Do they have representation of someone that might look like them, or someone in their family or someone in their community that is doing what they are aspiring to become when they grow up? What if they don't have goals? Maybe we as educators can stand in the gap and help them to develop those goals. And sometimes we can come to the table and we can sometimes assume, oh, well, they've got goals. Well, maybe they don't. And you know what? It's awesome, because maybe you can be the catalyst. Maybe you can be the change agent. You could be the one to instill a dream or a goal into that student, to make them to aspire to become something great when they, are of age. And so that's something to definitely keep in mind whenever you're dealing with developing grit in students. And so, I'm going to come back to, again, the tips that I had for you, remembering that when we are trying to develop grit and recognize grit in students, it is imperative that we remain empathetic, put ourselves in their shoes, find out what motivates our students. Do they have a goal? If not, let's help them goal set. Then, being intentional on building curiosity. What can we bring into our lessons that will build curiosity for our students? Is that a culture representation thing? Is that something about sports? Is that something going on socially? Like, what will build the curiosity in our classrooms? Also, celebrating the effort. Our children need to be celebrated more. It doesn't hurt to celebrate them. Um, Discussing mistakes optimistically, and then reminding them, you all have grit, you all can do this, and that you believe in them. So with that said, when you're doing your part to recognize grit in students, it is imperative that you see the big picture of the whole child. Continue to make instruction a place or an experience where it breeds curiosity. So continue to make instruction an experience that breeds curiosity and that invites all learners into that learning space. And then, of course, continuing to remind students of the goals that have been set, celebrating their effort, letting them know that you believe in them. And then, of course, teaching them to build that culture of resilience at all times, so that they don't give up on themselves whenever they have a low moment, and that whenever they're facing a challenge, they know that they have an option to make a great change to come about, their academic, journey, or in their life as a whole. So with that said, guys, thanks so much for plugging in and listening to me today on the Let's Get Gritty podcast with Dr. India White. Again, if you joined a little bit late, this show will be featured on Swain Girl Media channel, hosted by Precious Swain on Fire Stick. Also, if you're wanting to join me on Facebook, my channel there is Miss India White. LinkedIn is The India White. Twitter is Indie Speak and Teach. Instagram is Indie238, and YouTube is India White 123, and TikTok is Dr. India White. I forgot. So, with that said, I hope that you guys are able to connect with me. You can also check out my website at www.india-white.com. I'm here for you. I'm here for your service. I wish you guys have a splendid holiday season. Be safe. Feel free to, check in with me whenever, because I'll be here. I'll be around. And until next time, stay gritty.